Today, by viewer request, we are out here taking a look at the 2016 Nissan Maxima. The Maxima is kind of an interesting car because this size-wise slots between mid-size sedan segment and the full-size sedan segment. Pricing-wise, however, it's a little bit closer to the full-size segment. Because of the general size and the general price tag, this competes with a wide variety of competitors from both the mid-size sedan segment and the full-size segment. This can be seen as a step above your average mid-size sedan or perhaps a slightly more compact alternative to a full-size sedan. The Maxima gives you everything you expect out of the full-size sedan segment with a more premium interior than a mid-size sedan, standard V6 engine under the hood, and more power than the mid-size sedan segment as well. However, this is a little bit more compact than your average full-size sedan. So if you're looking at a full-size sedan but you think it's a little bit too big, but you like the features and the functions going on, the Maxima is an excellent choice. Likewise, if you're taking a look at top-end trims of the Chrysler 200, Ford Fusion, or the Nissan Altima, but you want something that's more premium on the outside, the Maxima is an excellent choice. The average mid-size sedan has the unenviable task of needing to be everything for everyone and offending nobody in the process. That's not necessarily going on in the larger sedan segment. There are a lot of competitors, and to differentiate themselves, Nissan has made a very style-forward sedan. We have this front end that looks very different from every other vehicle in this segment, and actually a little bit different than the other Nissan products as well. Although there are still a few common styling cues, like this strong chrome bar, this large Nissan logo, and then it gets mirrored by this smaller chrome bar below it. The headlamp design is very reminiscent of the Nissan Altima and the new Nissan Murano as well. We have a daytime running lamp strip integrated right in there, optional LED low beams. These are standard in the SR and the top end trims of this vehicle. We also have fog lamps down below. Although not standard in every model of Maxima, most models you'll find on dealer lots will have a very well integrated radar adaptive cruise control sensor. As you can see, you really can't tell where it is on the front of the vehicle. We also have very well integrated parking sensors standard on most trims. Although larger than an Altima, this is one of the smaller entries in the full-size sedan segment. This is about 3 inches shorter than a Toyota Avalon, about 4 inches shorter than a Buick LaCrosse, and a full 10 inches shorter than a Ford Taurus. This is right about the same length as an Acura TLX or a Lincoln MKZ. In the Nissan Infiniti lineup, the vehicle that fills the gap for the MKZ, the TLX, and the Lexus ES is actually the Nissan Maxima. It's really obvious when you take a look at it a little bit more closely. We have an awful lot more style in here than we find in other Nissan models, very much like you find in some Infiniti models out there, although the style is kept distinctly different. On the inside, we also find a high level of feature functionality that's standard. The 8-inch infotainment and navigation system, for instance, is standard, and most models you'll find will have leather seating. The rear end of the Maxima is a little bit less exciting than the front end. We still have a decent amount of style going on. We have these large tail lamp modules that wrap from the trunk lid all the way to the side of the vehicle. They do stick out a little bit, but they're not overly bubbly. They're actually a little bit more square. We are in the SR trim, so we do get a slightly different rear end trim. There are optional spoilers available. We have a chrome U shape right here that's upside down, mirrors what we have on the front. Then we have twin exhaust tips on every Maxima model. Most Maxima models will also have the very discreetly added parking sensors that we see on this model. There are really only two, one over here and one right over there on that side. Under the hood, we find just one engine. It is a 3.5-liter V6 engine, very closely related to what we see in the Nissan Altima. In this form, it produces 300 horsepower and 261 pound-feet of torque. It's mated only to a continuously variable transmission, sending power right here to the front wheels only. Unlike some of the competition, all-wheel drive is not offered in the Maxima at this time. Fuel economy comes in at 22 miles per gallon city, 30 highway, and 25 combined thanks to the continuously variable transmission, and those numbers are among the highest in this segment. Front seat comfort is excellent in the Maxima. This is among the best in the segment. What's interesting about the Maxima, however, is that you get basically the same seat design in the SV model and above. So SV, SL, SR, and Platinum all get this two-way extending thigh cushion for the driver's seat and a two-way adjustable lumbar support. You should know that those two things, however, are never found on the front passenger seat. In terms of comparisons, I find these seats more comfortable than basically every entry in this segment, with the possible exception of the Buick LaCrosse. The Buick LaCrosse does offer a four-way adjustable lumbar support that makes it easier for me to find a comfortable driving position. However, these seats borrow everything that I like about the Nissan Altima. We have a very soft cushion design that really allows you to feel like you're in the seat, not on the seat, like we find in the Chrysler 300, and it's very well designed for my average size 6-foot frame. We do have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, and it does become powered and memory linked in the top-end trim. Although the front seats are among the best in this segment, the rear seats are a little bit more compact, and that's because this is just not the same size as the Ford Taurus or the Chevy Impala. With the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have about 3 inches of legroom left, and that's about the same as we find in large mid-size sedans. Like some of the mid-size sedans, we have the same sort of problem when it comes to headroom, however. We have this very sexy side profile going on for the Maxima that makes it look excellent on the outside. However, it does limit headroom. My head's touching the ceiling, and I actually have to cock my head to one side if I want to sit in an upright fashion with my back actually against the backrest. That particular problem gets a little bit worse when we move over here to the middle seat, because the middle seat is a little higher off the ground and a little further forward than the outboard seating positions. Overall, however, the rear seats are still quite comfortable, and we have two large cup holders back here. However, you should know that the Chrysler, the Buick, and the Ford are going to be more accommodating for larger rear seat passengers. The Maxima falls between your average mid-size sedan and your average full-size sedan in a variety of different ways, and the cargo area is also one of those ways. Now, this cargo area has a better shape to it than many full-size sedans, but it is still a little bit smaller. That means that you can put a 24-inch roller bag in this position as I had it and still close the trunk lid, and you can actually stack a few of them across the back. You can't do that in very many sedans out there, even full-size sedans. However, when you take this bag out, you will still notice that this trunk is a decent amount smaller than some of those larger entries like the Ford Taurus. The Ford Taurus's trunk is almost 30% larger than what we find in the Maxima. Stepping into the Maxima, you'll notice right away that our SR trim does not have a sunroof. That's supposedly because it adds weight and increases the center of gravity. I don't really think that matters too much in the Maxima, but that's what Nissan tells us. The small item right there above the passenger side headrest is a small microphone. That's for the active noise cancellation system that's standard in most trims. Moving down from that, we do have two-way adjustable headrests and two-way adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger. Leather seating surfaces are standard on the Maxima in every trim except for the S trim. The SR gets a little bit of extra love with these Alcantara inserts. This is sort of a faux suede product. It also features blue stitching to help it stand out just a little bit more. Now, if you get the top-end Platinum trim, it's all leather, but it gets a similar quilted design. As you'd expect from a vehicle with this price tag, we have mostly soft-touch plastic, so we have a soft-touch injection molded upper that is then after-stitched. We have more Alcantara going on right here in the main portion of the door, and then a soft-touch armrest. You will find hard plastics, however, at the bottom of the door around the storage cubby and the speaker grille. Taking a closer look at the door panels, you can see that cross-hatched metal trim on the doors, as well as the after-stitching going on that injection molded portion of the dashboard and on the doors. That same design theme continues over to the dashboard, where we find blue stitching on the dashboard as well. Again, this is an injection molded piece that's then after-stitched. We find that same sort of trim going across there from the doors right over to the dashboard, and a very well integrated airbag cover. You'll find some additional metal effect trim running right here across the air vents and across the infotainment display. Now, this 8-inch infotainment system is standard in all models of the Maxima, which is an interesting twist because a lot of vehicles make it optional. On the passenger side, we do find a large and accommodating glove compartment. It's a slot and bin style arrangement, so the slot is quite deep, no problem fitting a large iPad inside. Taking a closer look at the center of the dashboard, we have two small air vents, hazard light button right in between, and then again we have that standard 8-inch infotainment system. This is very similar to what we see in the Nissan Murano with a few changes. If you want to know more about it, click that banner at the bottom of your screen. We have a single slot optical disc player, and this is where you'll find the SD mapping database right behind that little door. On the left side of the display, we have a direct access button for our menu, map, and audio. We also have a power button and volume knob, day-night mode, track forward, backward, back. We press here to enter or to enter the sound menu of the system, tune and scroll with that knob there as well. The camera button allows you to turn on and off the 360-degree camera if your vehicle is equipped, or enter the camera settings menu in our model. Below that, you'll find the controls for the dual zone climate control system, start-stop button right over here, and then a storage bin on the right side. This is quite deep, and this is where you'll find the USB input, auxiliary input, and enough room to store large smartphones inside. Behind that, we have a very traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way down, manual over to the left, up for up, and down for down. We also have two very large cup holders to the right of that. Although the infotainment system in the Maxima is a touchscreen system, we also have a controller knob, very similar to what we see in the Infiniti Q50. So we have a back button, menu button, map, and voice button, and then we have a controller that rotates around, clicks down to OK, and actually allows you to toggle side to side and up and down as well. This allows you to zoom in on the map and perform other functions in the system without touching the screen. You can use this controller instead. Below that, we have the drive mode select buttons for normal and sport, and then our heated and ventilated seat controls. The center armrest is large and softly padded, and it opens to reveal a moderately sized storage cubby. It is a little bit smaller than I expected it to be. We have coin holders right up front, 12-volt power outlet right there at the bottom, enough room for wallets and other small items. It is a little bit smaller than some of the competition. On the driver's side, we have a 4-needle instrument cluster with a tachometer over here on the left, speedometer there on the right. In between the two, we have a very large color multifunction display, again very similar to what we see in other Infiniti and Nissan models. The display is controlled via these buttons and toggle on the steering wheel. The side-to-side button moves between screens, as you can see there in the background. This toggles between the options in that screen, and then we have an OK button to enter. This screen is where you'll find things like your compass, as we're seeing right now, the navigation display if navigation was active. We also have our drive mode displayed right down there as well. Moving side to side, we have our trip computer information where we can see our fuel economy, driving history, that sort of thing. Different average fuel economy screen, driving aids, tire pressure. We also have a sport mode, which will give you a digital speedometer and some additional gauges, like our oil pressure and transmission temperature. Moving over one more, we have our warning review screen. This is where it'll tell you if there's anything wrong with your car. You'd see that in that display. We also have access to certain vehicle settings. The home screen gives you sort of a Reader's Digest of the various systems in the vehicle. So we get our digital speedometer right there, some infotainment information, and navigation information as well. Moving over to the infotainment option, this is where you can get information about what's playing right now. You can also change source right here inside this display. The Maxima steering wheel is a little bit different than what we see in other Nissan models because we do have this flat bottom sport wheel design, Alcantara inserts in our SR trim, and then moderate sport grips right up top as well. It is a sort of 3-spoke design with this split bottom spoke. On the left side of the steering wheel, we have those controls I showed you earlier. In addition, we have a source button and volume up, down. On the right side of the steering wheel is where we find our voice command button, phone hang-up pickup button, and then our cruise control buttons with our optional radar adaptive cruise control. You will find radar adaptive cruise control on a wide variety of the Nissan Maxima models. On either side of the steering wheel, you notice something that sets the Maxima apart. We have these large paddle shifters that are connected to the steering column, not to the steering wheel. I'm told this is the preference of most professional race drivers. However, I seem to prefer the ones that are located right here on the steering column. Either way, these are some of the nicest paddle shifters available in any modern vehicle, very similar to what we see in certain sporty Infiniti models. However, I will also have to say I don't quite understand the point of paddle shifters on a vehicle with a continuously variable transmission. Like the Altima, the Maxima does use a CVT or continuously variable transmission. And if you don't like CVTs, you're probably not going to like the way the Maxima drives. However, the CVT does benefit the Maxima in a number of ways. The first is acceleration. I ran from 0 to 60 in this in 5.7 seconds, and the road surface was quite wet. There was an awful lot of front wheel slip. As I typically do with front-wheel drive cars, I had the traction control system disabled. That means that we did get a lot of front-wheel slip, but nicely, we didn't get any front-wheel hop. And that's where you're in a front-wheel drive car, the front wheels are spinning, and it feels like the front end of the car is hopping up and down a little bit. We didn't get that in the Maxima at all. Some of the front-wheel slip was caused by this vehicle having 300 horsepower, which is a decent amount of power for a front-wheel drive car. Some of the wheel slip was caused by the fact that the road surface was damp because it had just been raining, although sun had been shining for a few hours. And lastly, because the tires that Nissan includes, even on this SR model, are not as grippy as I would like. Despite all of that, however, 5.7 seconds 0 to 60 is very, very quick for this particular segment. That's notably faster than the V6 versions of the Chrysler 300 or Dodge Charger, even though they have 8-speed automatics. The Altima even managed to be slightly faster to 60 than Chevy's Impala, and even though the next generation Buick LaCrosse is expected to get an 8-speed automatic transmission, I wouldn't be surprised if this was still a little bit faster than that. Continuously variable transmissions can help improve acceleration because they can keep the engine at that maximum power band as we're hearing right now. So you press the accelerator pedal, you're accelerating hard, the engine hovers right around there at 5,500, 6,000 RPM, and you just keep accelerating. Now you should know that some of the engine noise that we heard in that little bit right there is actually digital engine noise because Nissan is now borrowing a page from BMW's book and piping fake engine noise into the cabin. Braking distances in the Maxima are fairly average for this particular segment at 123 feet. That is a little bit shorter than a Honda Accord EX, although I had expected the distances to be a little bit shorter than they were. The reason that distance is a little bit longer than I would like is because of the tire selection even on this SR trim. On the flip side, fade resistance is excellent in the Maxima. The light curb weight and the excellently tuned suspension really help compensate for the tires when it comes to the handling. I'm going to give this a B. We have a little bit less grip in this than we do in the LaCrosse or in the Impala, but interestingly enough, you'll actually find better grip in this than base versions of the Chrysler 200 or the Dodge Charger. That's because the base versions of the Charger and 300 are still quite heavy and they have narrower tires. The excellent 50-50 weight balance and rear-wheel drive dynamic in those vehicles just can't compensate for the fact that they're heavier and have skinnier tires. And of course, in neutral handling situations where the power is off, the rear-wheel drive layout of those vehicles isn't really doing you any good either. When it comes to the ride, I'm going to give even this SR trim an A. This is a very well-designed suspension system. Even in this SR trim, it doesn't feel upset over broken pavement or those steel plates that we saw right back there. Even out here on rough gravel roads like this, the ride in the Maxima is still very well composed. The SR trim is definitely firmer than the other Maxima trims out there, but this is still a little bit softer than some of the sports entries in this full-size sedan segment. Overall, I think I prefer the ride in the top-end Platinum trim of the Maxima, but even this SR trim is a very well-sorted option. When it comes to cabin noise, we scored 69 decibels, which means this cabin is just about as quiet as the Chrysler 300 or the Chevy Impala. Keep in mind that our model does have the optional active noise cancellation that you don't find in the base versions of the Maxima. When it comes to fuel economy, the Maxima, like the Altima, scores incredibly well thanks to its light curb weight and the CVT. The last Nissan Altima that we tested got 27 miles per gallon, and this slightly larger Nissan Maxima only dropped by half a mile per gallon to 26.5 over a week of very mixed driving. That is notably better than every other entry in this segment, except for the 4-cylinder entries and the hybrid entries. The trade-off there, of course, is that the full hybrid, the mild hybrid, and the 4-cylinder entries in the full-size sedan segment are all going to be significantly less powerful than this. They're going to accelerate an awful lot slower. Overall, I'm not quite convinced that the Maxima lives up to its 4-door sports car marketing tagline. The steering is a little bit light, it also is not quite as connected as some of the entries in this segment, and the tire choice just disappointed me a little bit. It's quite noticeable out on these winding mountain roads where the front end of the Maxima definitely loses traction before some of the entries. Now honestly, a lot of people will complain about the CVT, but I don't really think it's that big of a problem in the Maxima, because it really does help improve acceleration and gives us excellent fuel economy. Personally, I'm willing to trade those two things for a traditional automatic transmission feel. Now, these shift paddles on the steering column do strike me as a little bit unusual, because shift paddles on a CVT are just about as useful as shift paddles on a French poodle. Nissan has priced the Maxima very aggressively for 2016. It starts at $32,510 for the S trim. Now, the S trim does get cloth seats, and we don't get that two-way power lumbar support, but we do get the standard 8-inch navigation system. Standard navigation is something that you don't generally find in this segment or even the luxury segment. A wide variety of luxury vehicles out there still don't give you standard navigation. Perhaps the best value in the Maxima, and actually in this segment, is the $34,450 SV trim that gives you standard leather heated seats, park sensors, front and rear, the power lumbar support, and the extending thigh cushion, in addition, of course, to that standard 8-inch infotainment screen. Now again, the only engine offered is that 3.5-liter V6 producing 300 horsepower, and almost everything else that you're seeing is very standard on that model. And that makes the SV trim one of the best values in this particular segment. Obviously, you can get more features. You can step up to the SL, the SR, or the Platinum model, but the SV as it is a very good buy. For $36,990, the SL adds the panoramic roof and the Bose sound system, along with radar cruise control, blind spot monitoring, and collision warning with auto brake. For $37,770, you will get the Sporty Maxima, and that is the SR trim that we have been testing this week. In addition to the 19-inch wheels that we see up front and in the back, they are wrapped in slightly grippier tires. Now, they're no wider than the standard Maxima's tires, but they are a little bit grippier. We also, of course, get a Sport Tune suspension. They delete the sunroof in this model, supposedly to reduce a little bit of weight. We get those Alcantara seat inserts and the low beam LED lamps. The SR trim is then polished off with some very slight interior and exterior tweaks, like the blue stitching we have on the inside, the paddle shifters on the steering column, and a few tweaks on the front and rear. $39,960 buys you the top-end Platinum trim, and I think that trim actually fits the character of the Maxima a little bit better overall. Instead of sporty, we get more luxury-oriented features in the Platinum. So for instance, we have a seat memory system for the driver's seat that also coordinates with a power tilt telescopic steering column that you don't get in the other models. We get a rain-sensing windshield wiper system, rear sunshade that is powered, as well as quilted leather on the inside and a 360-degree camera system, basically borrowed from the Infiniti models. It actually inserts an additional camera right here under the Nissan logo and on the sides of the vehicle, so you can get a bird's eye view while you're parking. Although the Maxima and the Murano are two very different kinds of vehicles, they do borrow a number of style elements from one another. We get the same sort of general side theme with this black strip that runs from the window line all the way down here to the trunk lid. I think this is much more attractive in the Maxima than it is in the Murano. Overall, the exterior style of the Murano just isn't my cup of tea, and although the Maxima is borrowing many of those same styling cues and is definitely a love it or hate it design, I actually like the look in the Maxima. Obviously, the Maxima competes with your average mid-size sedan, but this also competes with the average full-size sedan in this category, not necessarily the less expensive full-size sedan entries. So while the Chevy Impala starts very low, it also starts with a 4-cylinder engine. We find a V6 under this hood. Obviously, the Toyota Avalon and Hyundai Azera are also in the running. The Azera is actually the only entry in this segment that comes in a little bit less than the Maxima. When you adjust for standard feature content, a base Hyundai Azera will be about $1,000 less than the Maxima. However, when you start adding features to your Hyundai Azera, it can actually become about the same price or sometimes even a little bit more expensive than the Nissan. That makes the Nissan one of the best values in this particular segment. When you adjust for standard feature content, the Maxima quite simply beats almost every other model in this particular segment. The only caveat there, of course, is that this is smaller than almost every other entry in this segment, so if you really need that back seat or the trunk room, the Maxima may not be the right vehicle for you. Buick's LaCrosse and the Toyota Avalon will both set you back about $3,000 more than a comparably equipped Nissan Maxima. Now on the flip side, the Buick and the Toyota will have a little bit more rear seat headroom especially, and more legroom in the back. In terms of driving dynamics, I would actually say that the LaCrosse, the Avalon, and the Maxima are all very well matched in this segment. They are some of the best handling front-wheel drive entries. Even though this does have a CVT, even though we did have a decent amount of torque steer, I would actually put it with those other two. Now the Buick LaCrosse, if you get the Hyperstrut front suspension, really eliminates the torque steer, and you can get all-wheel drive in it, which really does put it in a segment all to its own. In addition, the LaCrosse also offers a slightly more attractive instrument cluster with that partial LCD design and standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. However, as I said, you will have to pay for it because it is significantly more than the Maxima. It's about 10%. Chrysler's 300 is sort of the monkey wrench in this particular segment because it is a rear-wheel drive vehicle with absolutely impeccable driving dynamics. It has a nearly perfect 50-50 weight balance if you get the V6 engine, and of course a V8 and all-wheel drive are available on that car as well. Those things you can't find on the Maxima. However, you will pay more for those features if you do want them on your Chrysler 300 than you will on the Maxima, so feature for feature they're really quite similar, but you can get more on the Chrysler 300. You can definitely get more on the dynamic side with that Chrysler as well. The interior inside the Maxima is a very nice place to spend your time. Now Chrysler does offer things like a stitched leather dashboard in the Chrysler 300, which does set it apart from some of the competition, but you'll still find just about as many hard plastics lower in the dashboard as we do in this Nissan. When it comes to absolute performance numbers, the Maxima may surprise you a little bit, because although this is a front-wheel drive vehicle and the Chrysler 300 is a rear-wheel drive vehicle by default, we get wider tires on this and it's lighter than a Chrysler 300, and that really helps improve handling. So in absolute skid pad numbers, although you don't get the rear-wheel drive dynamic, you will actually hold the road a little bit better in base versions of the Maxima versus base versions of the Chrysler 300. In addition, the Maxima proved to be a little bit faster 0 to 60 than the Chrysler 300, even though it has that new 8-speed automatic. Ford's Taurus is kind of an interesting option because you get an awful lot of bang for the buck if you're after a big sedan for very little cash. For just over $27,000, you get an enormous back seat, one of the largest trunks available in the US, and it's about 10 inches longer than the Maxima. It's not quite as exciting to drive, however. Its inside is definitely plain, and so is the outside. It's just not very exciting all the way around. By the time you start comparably equipping your Ford Taurus, you're right about the same price as this as well. You're only a few $100s off. Of course, Ford does sell the Taurus SHO, which will out-handle, out-accelerate, and have a bigger price tag than the Nissan Maxima. The Taurus SHO really is the Ford cross-shop to a V8 Chrysler 300 or a V8 Dodge Charger. Obviously, the Maxima is less expensive than the Lincoln, the Acura, or the Lexus. The Lexus is going to be considerably more expensive than the Maxima, although it is going to be larger because we get a much bigger back seat in the Lexus now that it is based on an Avalon, not a Camry. However, on the Acura side, the Acura TLX is just about the same size as a Honda Accord, which really makes sense comparing it to this model, because this is only a little bit bigger than a Nissan Altima, although it is much nicer on the inside and on the outside. Same sort of thing that's going on in the TLX. Now the TLX is going to be about $1,500 to $4,700 more than your Maxima, depending on how you configure it. However, when you start adjusting for standard feature content, that's really where the Maxima starts to shine, because this is a solid $1,500 value in SV trim versus even base versions of the TLX. When we take a look at base versions of the Maxima versus base versions of the TLX, the value proposition is very good. We get a standard V6 engine in this and excellent fuel economy. The TLX has that 4-cylinder engine in base models and the V6 engine only in the upper level trims. Well, the Acura starts with a 4-cylinder engine and then you have to option up into a V6. The Maxima has a V6 standard. In addition, although people have complained about the CVT under this hood, plenty of people have complained about the 9-speed automatic in the Acura TLX. I would actually call the transmissions a wash in that regard. Now, the base 4-cylinder engine, the TLX, has an absolutely excellent dual-clutch transmission from Acura. However, it's significantly less powerful than this. Acceleration times are definitely longer. Now, you can get all-wheel drive in your TLX, but a large portion of TLX sales are going to be front-wheel drive, and those would obviously compare with this Maxima. When you start comparably equipping your vehicle and adjusting for feature content, that's really where the Maxima will start to shine versus the TLX in front-wheel drive V6 trim. This can be between $1,500 and $4,700 less expensive than the Acura. While I do think the Acura has a slightly better driving dynamic than the Maxima, this is quite good for a front-wheel drive vehicle. In terms of overall style, this is probably a little bit more avant-garde than we find in the current generation Acura products, but the interior is relatively similar. We do get a slightly nicer interior in the Acura TLX in terms of overall parts quality, but the style of this interior is actually a little bit more my taste. My bottom line for the Maxima is that this is a solid upgrade to the Nissan Altima. I think it's a good value alternative to the MKZ or the TLX or the Lexus ES. However, on the flip side, for the full-size sedan segment, it's just a little bit too small to be direct competition to the Taurus or the LaCrosse. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2016 Nissan Maxima. Be sure and click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.